Hi, everybody. Michael Howie. I'm the host and producer of Defender Radio. I run our channel as well, and I'm with the Fur Bears. And we're about to get started talking about sensationalism, coyotes, and the CBC. I've got my coffee, so I'm pretty confident that I'm ready to go. Always tastes better from a Targus mug. So let's load up this article. I shared this yesterday, and it was kind of a look how silly this is, but there was a lot of reaction to it. And when I went back and read it again, I actually picked up some very concerning trends. And I want to talk about a few of those. So the article is, I could have lost my daughter. Pack of coyotes stalks girl in PEI. The subhead is, I could have lost my daughter if something would have happened. It's by Katerina Georgieva and Cody McKay from CBC News. Their email addresses are not listed, incidentally. So the story is very interesting. The lead is that a mom on PEI wants some coyotes in her area dealt with after her 17-year-old daughter was stalked by a pack of them while riding her pony last month. This is near Dunstaffnage, I don't know, part of PEI. And she was riding her pony, Mr. Billy, not far from her family's property. She said she saw this is the daughter, saw what she thought looked like a German Shepherd, but was actually a coyote. Within seconds, 4 more coyotes appeared, and all 5 of them ran toward her in a V formation. She was scared. Her adrenaline went up. The pony was upset. And she said she started screaming, waving her arms, and slapping her leg to intimidate the encroaching pack. And doing so caused the coyotes to run away. So she did exactly what she should have done. Let's start with that. She definitely hazed them in an appropriate way. She showed that she wasn't backing down, that she was big and scary. They went away. And those coyotes today, frankly, and I saw a couple people comments on this, those coyotes are better for that community now because they learned that getting close to a person on a horse is a bad idea. So that's a definite positive takeaway from this. Of course, the mother has said that, the daughter says she won't go out alone anymore. She's too afraid to go out alone. Watch your kids. Don't let them go off alone right now, not in this area. And they comment that the coyotes are a problem. They've been in this area for the last 4 years. There's absolutely no comment about what kind of a problem they are, though. They just says that they are a problem. And that's, kind of upsetting in itself. Now, first I was going to do a very, very brief read through of this and then talk about what to do. But there's a couple elements in this article that really need to be discussed. The headline says the pack of coyotes stalks the girl. The lead, so that first sentence of the article says she was stalked by a pack of them while riding her pony. But the actual comments from the girl, the daughter, say that she saw what she thought was a German Shepherd. It was a coyote. And then a couple seconds later, 4 more appeared, and all of them ran towards her in a V formation. So the V formation thing is incidental. That's you and your friends walk in a V formation downtown Toronto sometimes. It just happens. So they weren't stalking her. By her definition, they came toward her. They are very, very curious animals. And just like domestic dogs, they kind of want to know what's going on. Perhaps their den is nearby. Perhaps there's a food source nearby, and they want to get between this potential threat and their food source or den. So they approach the girl. She screams and waves her arms. And that's what yelling, not screaming, and waving your arms, making loud noises, throwing things at, but not hitting the animals, are all ways you can haze coyotes. And that's what's taught from, through my blogs, through my podcasts, through Coyote Watch Canada's in-class seminars, and by various other organizations that also work on this, as well as government. So it's very important, though, that the headline and the lead say stalked. The actual behavior was approached, and then a cut line says that, so a cut line is the caption under a photo is a picture of some coyotes in a field near where the girl saw them, say that she was surrounded by coyotes in July. This isn't just poor communication between a copy editor and a reporter. A copy editor is the person who may write the headline, or the editor may write the headline. You've got 2 journalists who have written this lead that says she was stalked. There's no evidence of that. The girl herself says they ran toward her in a V formation, And then whomever wrote the cut line for this photo says she was surrounded. So we've now got 3 different accounts of what happened in one article. That's very alarming. And that's not the kind of thing that any journalist should do. They should see that and say, hey, here's a continuity problem. And an editor, by any stretch, should be saying, hey, why do we have 3 different versions of this? But that obviously didn't happen. So it's very alarming to me that got through the editing process. And it, of course, as an article itself, it's really not that great because it does say what happened, yes. But it also doesn't provide any information about what you should do if you see coyotes or why there are coyotes in the area. It doesn't talk about anything. I mean, there is a single comment from a wildlife biologist who said that an incident where somebody feels threatened or feels like their safety is compromised by the coyotes is something we will definitely take seriously. We will attempt to set up a site visit and gather more information. So yeah, this girl did feel scared. And there's... while many of us may not feel scared by this kind of an incident, it makes sense that someone would feel scared, particularly if you've never seen coyotes or if you've been taught through things such as the media that coyotes are bad. Then yeah, you're going to be scared. That's reasonable. But what we do about that is where we start to run into problems. So as this mother says, who again is rightfully scared, she's saying someone needs to do something about it. And she, literally saying she wants something to be done about them. What does that mean? The reality is, if we go out and kill every single coyote in that area today, I can guarantee you within 2 to 5 years, you're going to have more coyotes in that area. What's important is to teach the coyotes who are there to not approach people by doing things such as waving your arms around, yelling at them, throwing things towards them. So pretty much doing what the girl did, incidentally. And it's very upsetting to me as a former journalist and someone who takes a fair bit of pride, is that this went on without anyone putting in a link to coyotes in the area. What should you do? What should you know? To informing citizens. And that's something Leslie Sampson from Coyote Watch Canada frequently will say is, informing citizens so they can understand what's going on in their community. And none of that has taken place. It's very simply, as Brianna, as you've said, it's because fear sells. And I really think that's the case here. They did not do the work. And that's their job, is to do the work. So there are some very clear problems in here. And I can go on and on and on about sensationalism and the impact it has. I've done webinars on that. I'll probably do more webinars on it. And I will very likely write about this on Tuesday when I'm back to my normal hours. With a little more analysis and this next part, which is what you can do. So ordinarily, I would say contact the journalists. But in this case, it appears that we may not be able to do that too easily as their contact information is not there. And when you click on the contact CBC news link for that area, there's nothing there. I'm still going to try and find it. It's probably some combination of first letter, last name at cbc.ca or something like that. But what I am going to do is contact the CBC ombudsman, who currently is Esther Enkin. She has been in that position since 2012. So her role is to respond to complaints about what's going on the CBC. And if you go to the ombudsman.cbc.radio-canada.ca, because they like simple URLs, you can see the responses to a number of complaints about a number of different publications they've done, radio, television, online, etc. So I'm going to be writing to her, and I'm going to be, first thing I'm going to do is show my concern about just the very fact that the 3 different versions of what happened are in this article. But I'm also going to ask what the CBC's position is right now on reporting on wildlife, because from what I have seen, there is not necessarily any kind of a pattern. There's not a set of rules or guidelines. Now, if you've been to any kind of journalism program or communications program, you'll learn that there are a lot of standards, guidelines for how journalists or communicators approach certain subjects. When we write about suicide, for example, there's a set way that we are supposed to use terminology. When we write about crime, there's a set way we're supposed to do it. and especially with crime, which I think is very relevant here, it's not just that we want to write things in a certain way, but it's also to protect ourselves legally and to protect the people to whom we're writing about, of whom we're writing about. So that's something that should be considered. And when people ask about that, I immediately send them to animalsandmedia.org. I'll include that in the Facebook comments and on the YouTube links below. And this is run by a few folks, including Dr. Carrie Packwood Freeman, who I've had on Defender Radio a few times and has conducted some webinars for us. And I'm not going to try and tell her story, but there is a wonderful essay that she wrote along with Dr. Mark Beckhoff and Dr. Sarah Bexell. Mark, as many of you know, who's also a frequent guest on Defender Radio, is a wonderful anthrozoologist. His background is, I believe, evolutionary biology or ethology, one of the two. He'll probably send me an email and correct me. And Dr. Bexell, I believe, is a philosopher who has worked with Mark in the past. And this paper genuinely changed the way I did my job as a journalist, not just in reporting on wildlife, but in how I view a lot of what I do, a lot of what the impact is, and this very much informed my career. The paper is called Giving a Voice to the Voiceless, Incorporating Non-Human Animal Perspectives as Journalistic Sources. And I'm not sure what the citation is, but I'll include a link to it as well. And very much what they do in this is set out the case for making standards for reporting about non-human animals. And for those who are curious, I try and say non-human animals the first time I'm writing, or the first time I mention them in an article, and then switch back to animals very much for the sake of clarity and to try and keep things keep the clutter out. There's also some conversation about whether or not we should say non-human animals or just assume that everyone knows, and so on and so forth. That's a whole different conversation and not one I'm going to have on Facebook Live. But what's very interesting is that they take the, see if I can find the actual, I should have prepared this better. I apologize for that. But they take the standards. I'm going to see, there might be a link to it here. Let's click on some buttons and see what happens. This is the joy of doing live. Okay, so it's the Society of Professional Journalists Code of Ethics, as well as the Associated Press Style Book. These are, in Canada, we have our own version of these. They are books and guidelines that dictate, as I said, how we write about things like suicide, how we write about things like crime, how we write about things like court proceedings, because there are best practices for the purpose of communicating, but there are also legal reasons for a lot of this, a lot of ethical reasons for a lot of this. And in the case of non-human animals, there's very, very little. And one of the more profound comments on this is, and I'm paraphrasing heavily here from memory, that we, and I say we in the current situation as a former journalist, we as journalists, I'm doing this below the camera, need to give the non-human perspective. When we write a story, we should take every effort to tell the various facets of it. And it's not two sides to every story, because there can be one side, there can be 1,000 sides. But in the case of, in this instance that we're talking about today in PEI, the young woman has something she needs to say, has part of the story. The mother has part of the story. The biologist that's very briefly referenced at the end has part of the story. But the person who isn't in any way considered is the coyote. The coyotes in the story are viewed as very clearly aggressive animals, and that's about it. There's little done to give an opportunity to analyze that behavior. Now, clearly we can't, walk out with a notepad and pen or a microphone to a pack of coyotes and say, "Dear Mr. Coyote, what were you thinking? What were your motivations?" But what we can do is talk to people who have knowledge of coyote behavior. I have done this in the past, served as that source. I know Leslie Sampson, Coyote Watch Canada, has served as that source. My colleague Adrian Nelson at the Fur Bears out west has served as that source. There are a great number of potential academics, field people, journalists, and communicators like myself, who have the background and the experience and the knowledge to be able to say, this is what I would interpret this behavior as. So at the beginning of this video, I said coyotes are very curious. They were running toward, I don't know how fast they were going or how they were moving, but they were moving towards this individual who, as soon as she started making noise, stopped, turned, and ran. So that to me was very clearly not aggressive. That was not them trying to attack her. That was them probably curious. At the very, very most, I would state that it may have been them getting between this potential threat and their den site, food source, pups, whatever. But the point is that I'm speaking for those coyotes. I'm giving them a voice. I'm giving them a perspective. And that wasn't done in this article. So it's very important that we find a way to communicate the importance of this. And this is where remaining relatively calm and rational when we're talking and when we're writing letters, which we'll talk about momentarily. Because if you say, hey, you should have talked to the coyote, they're probably not going to take you all that seriously. But if you can form that cogent argument of there is another perspective in this story, and that is the perspective of the non-human animal. Clearly, that animal can't provide their own perspective, but there are many people who could interpret their perspective in a balanced manner based on experience, research, knowledge, etc. And at the very least, we can then forward people onto this wonderful site that Carrie Packwood Freeman has, animalsandmedia.org. We can forward them this wonderful essay and say, here are ways you may want to look at this. Here are some tips for you. And for me, the reason I enjoy that is it's all about providing solutions. I mean, that's one of the things that attracted me to the fur bears in the first place, was not stop trapping beavers. It was, you don't need to trap beavers because we're going to build these flow devices for you. And please do go to thefurbears.com to learn more about that. But it's the concept of having a solution, not just saying this is a problem, but acknowledging there are other ways to do it. And here are some of them, to make it not about us saying this is bad, but saying here's how it can be better. And I truly believe in these cases that is the best approach. So I am myself going to be writing the CBC Ombudsman, Esther Enkin. There is a form online you can fill out. I'll probably be doing this as an open letter, actually, to the Ombudsman, and post that as a blog at thefurbears.com on Tuesday morning. Also share that on this channel. And the other thing that came up that I wanted to touch briefly on was the comments. So a few people, when I was talking about this on Facebook last night and on Twitter last night, they were saying, I wish we had commenting on this so we could correct it. And yes, that would be beneficial. As I explained, and I'd like to explain again, the problem with that is for every one of us who say, hey, here's the problem with the way this was done. Here are some information, like here are the facts as we know them. Here is information that can be of use. And here are web links you can go to find more information. There are people who actively enjoy trolling, who want to just cause problems. There are people who want to kill coyotes just because they enjoy it and will jump on these comment sections to try and make their case. There are people who, for some reason, and I don't understand the psychology behind this. I understand maybe the basic emotion behind it, but not the psychology of how far it's gone, intentionally try and create fear. And they will jump on newspaper websites, jump on social media and start commenting from all over the country because they had a negative experience and think that everybody needs to know that all coyotes are like this. And again, I understand that base emotion. I don't understand why they've taken it so far. That's maybe something for further analysis at another time. But what I strongly recommend, everyone who has read this article, who's upset about it, if you share it with the caveat that people don't need to read it, but there are major flaws. Giving this story more clicks is kind of a double-edged sword because it's showing that they were successful in getting people reading. And that may not be positive, but we also need to share it to show what the problem is. I recommend you do contact the CBC Ombudsman. Again, the base link is www.ombudsman.cbc.radio-canada.ca. And I will include that link as well in the posts and on the YouTube links. And make a complaint. Be very, very clear. don't allow your emotion to overwhelm what you're writing. That is something that's very difficult to do. I don't want to try and take away from how angry some people feel, how scared some people feel over this kind of thing. And it's important, though, that we try and remain rational in these cases. We try and remain very, very fact-based. Well, someone's walking by with a bunch of dogs. That's fun. Easily distractible. The other thing to do when writing these is to have that solution in mind. So again, I talked about animalsandmedia.org, which is a wonderful website. I talked about that essay. Being able to say, look at these examples of what we can do, of why we should be doing this, and talking about the potential fallout. And that fallout, as I think most of us know at this point, is the absolute fear of individuals reading these articles without education. And by education, I mean without people like the Fur Bears, Coyote Watch Canada, the government, saying, here's what you need to know about coyotes and why you shouldn't be immediately afraid of them. So without that education, they're reacting to situations. And if they're leading into those situations with fear already, you can imagine it's not going to be a positive reaction. Then we get into the cycle of the media reporting on that based on that individual's fear. And eventually we end up with policy. And that's when city council, town council, the province, the federal government responds to this ball of fear and media sensationalism. And that's when bad things really start to happen. Without getting too far into these, again, there's a situation, I'm not sure, I think it was north of Durham, when we talked about coyote sensationalism is in one of my webinars. And the newspapers, the television stations have been talking about coyotes showing up and just sending out warnings, be aware that they're here, but not providing any context for that, not providing any information about what to do. So this went on for several months. And then a person saw what they thought was a coyote walking down the street, seeming dazed and confused. Police show up, and I still don't know why or what went on. The police officer, I think, tried bumping the coyote a couple of times, ran over it with their car and ran over it with their car again, and eventually did shoot the animal, which turned out to be a senior dog that had escaped its yard when the wind blew open the fence. To me, that I don't want to harp on that incident, but to me, it's a very linear progression of lack of education about coyotes, about wildlife, about conflict, about coexistence. And as I said, that ball of fear and media sensationalism leading to reacting with fear, reacting with sort of the unknown. And that's one of the reasons why it's very important to talk about these things. So you may want to include something about that to your letters to the ombudsman. It may help, may not help. And please share your letter, share what you're writing. And if you get a response, share that as well. Let people know that you had concern about it, that what's going on about it. And from there, maybe we can get ahead of this. There's communities now where the journalists have learned about coyotes and have learned that style of fear-based reporting, of reporting without context, of providing information without balance, has very negative consequences, not just for the animals who are at stake, but the people too, who start living in fear, who aren't able to fulfill or feel fulfilled, whose pets end up being, restricted in inappropriate ways. And as I said, we end up with poor policy, and eventually bad things will happen. That's sort of an inevitability unless we stop this cycle. And by the way, spell check, please. Write down by hand in a notebook on the back of your hand. Write it down on Facebook, then load it into any word processor, and click spell check. As someone who has read complaint letters, as someone who's been in a similar type of position, albeit at a much lower level, that adds immediate credibility to your arguments, to your points. So just take that extra 30 seconds and run a spell check on it. Provide solutions and try and keep the emotional level down so that the facts are what are focused on. And we've got a comment. Canine biologists to explain their behavior to the public so they don't freak out over nothing. That's very true. And it doesn't need to be biologists. I think that's very important because there are some biologists who are more interested in getting headlines than they are in providing education. And those of you in the coyote community are very aware of whom I'm speaking. But as I said, I have acted as someone who can provide context to some behavior. And in that, I want to be very clear. There's a lot of saying, I don't know. And that's what the media tends not like. And that's what people who are afraid tend to not like too, is when you say, well, this is how the coyote behaved. And that's, the coyotes approaching this young woman in PEI. I said, it is very likely that they were just curious. It's also possible that they were defending or getting in between her and Densite food source. It's possible that they were interested in what the horse was doing. They may have not seen one before, or at least not seen one up close. We don't know for sure, though, but we are very, very certain that this was not aggression. They were not stalking. They were not surrounding. They were checking it out. And that's, by having someone who can provide that other viewpoints, it also enables journalists to have more language at their disposal. And that's something I've talked about with Leslie Sampson at length, is as a journalist, what word do you have other than attack? What word do you have other than stalk? Those are the ones you've heard. So it comes down to frequently us taking the initiative and pursuing this in a way that will be beneficial for the animals, for the journalists, and for the residents. But please do talk about it. Try and stay with facts. Point out potential fallacies, but point out solutions too. That's always important. It's that whole Carnegie of sandwiching bad things between good things, whether or not you believe in that. But it always helps when you can say, this is where I think the problem is, and here are ways that we can improve it. And that's very important, sort of whatever you're dealing with in life, but especially in dealing with journalists who may have a bit of pride, or dealing with communities that are afraid. So hopefully this will be of help to you guys. I realize I keep looking down and away. I don't know why I'm doing that, but I will keep an eye on that for next time. And please do let me know what you'd like to do. In this case, the online commenting on CBC is disabled. So how are you going to talk about this? What are you going to do? Are you going to talk to your friends and families? Do you have a blog you're going to write? Do you have Microsoft? Not Microsoft. I'm reading things now off my webcam there. It says Microsoft. Do you have a blog? Do you have a podcast? Do you use Facebook Live? Do you tweet? Are you on Instagram? Do you work with a wildlife rehabber? I really want to know what you're doing to try and sort of curb this fear and get ahead of it so that we can all coexist safely and compassionately. But that's it for now. As I said, the blog will be online on Tuesday, and I hope you do share this video and help us move forward in speaking on behalf of the animals. Thanks.